Hi everyone, this is John Sneisen from the Economic Truth Report, and today is episode number 38. And I got the pleasure to have a great geopolitical analyst and podcaster from Geopolitics and Empire. His name is Hrvoje Morić. He's a geopolitical analyst, as I said, for the podcast, and the founder of Geopolitics and Empire platform that he's now building. With background in economics, international relations, Hrvoje has dedicated his work to exploring global politics, economics, and societal issues through in-depth interviews with experts and thought leaders. As a passionate advocate for freedom and independent thought, Hrvoje brings a unique perspective to discussion on topics such as global governance, decentralization, and the future of the world economy. He has appeared on numerous media shows, and continues to provide insightful commentary and on current events, drawing from his extensive research and global experiences. So, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
It's good to be here. I think you said this is your episode, what, 38? I just hit today my 500th episode of the podcast, and that's not counting like
Well,
probably
congratulations.
thanks, and that's probably not counting. I think the thousand. I don't know how many I have to count interviews I did on TNT Radio. Of course, you were a guest on there, and I'm hoping in the new year, after the new year, to have you as a guest as well on Geopolitics and Empire.
My pleasure. Yeah, no, I would look forward to that very much. It's a lot of great names that you had on, so that'd be very honorable to be able to be picked as, being able to come on your podcast. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Well, there's so much that have happened, like I'm just like, I currently, it's really hard to keep track on everything that's going on. But how about you start with, what you see as the most important, events of the last, like, let's say 3 months. Of course, we know the election of Donald Trump was pretty big, and then there's some stuff happening in Syria. We got a couple of wars going on, in the one in the Middle East, and then in between Russia and Ukraine. So, I don't know. It's kind of a hard thing for you to, maybe pick and choose what's the most important, events that you've seen like over the last, like, 3 months to half a year. Maybe you could just start there, and then we'll just, there's so much to pick up on here. So we have lots to talk about anyways.
Yeah, I mean, tell me about it. Every week, I do for my paid subscribers on Substack. I do a weekly analysis where I put together, aggregate all of the best news headlines, and then I provide my commentary. And I was just working on that today. And there's so much, and it's difficult to whittle things down. But for me on the podcast in general, I've got, maybe two, three, or four core themes that are always running that are most important for me. And I guess one of them would be the technocracy, right?
Yeah.
And but it's expanded now. So, Patrick Wood is our resident expert, right, on technocracy. I had a chat with him a few weeks back off the record. He's doing well, and so technocracy. I call it the algorithm ghetto. In 2020,
Yeah.
I had one, the famed Jewish historian Edwin Black, who wrote about IBM and the Holocaust and the Nazis. So he's coined the phrase algorithm ghetto, which is my favorite term
Yeah.
for the social credit system. Some people call it digital gulag,
Yeah.
cyber gulag, electronic concentration camp. There's many of these synonyms. And I also like the term algocracy. So back in 2020, I was a guest on Spiro Skouras's show. He had a popular channel. He got deplatformed twice and just gave up. But I said that the pandemic, the purpose of the pandemic was to bring in global algocracy. So global government with a rule by AI. So you've got people like Nick Bostrom, who wrote in a white paper like 2020. I was citing his paper where he said we need a totalitarian world surveillance state run by AI. And now you've got people, just like 2 weeks ago, Joe Rogan had on Mark Andreessen. I don't know if you saw that
Yeah.
3 hour.
No, I did not see that yet. No.
Right. And so Mark Andreessen, one of the big tech dudes, and Rogan was saying, "Hey, look, it'd be cool to have AI run government." And I'm like, so now you're starting to see this narrative come about that we need AI, algocracy to run everything. And in my last week's report, I cited many mainstream sources that are now talking about this. One of my listeners actually sent me an article from 2020. I just shared within the hour. It was an academic paper titled "Happiness Economics as Technocracy." I call it friendly fascism, right?
Friendly,
Happiness,
friendly
happiness
fascism.
should be
Yeah.
technocratic. Happiness should be technocratic and centralized. So for me, this is one of the core threats because we have to be, and so Patrick Wood, you of course give him the credit. He's pointing to techno-populism now. So you've got Trump, which is a populist candidate,
Yeah.
right? And then in his around him now is Elon Musk and PayPal Mafia, Peter Thiel,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
David Sachs. I think he's the new czar for what is it, AI or something. And that's the technocracy aspect. So technocracy, populism, you get techno populism. And I've been taken off of PayPal by the Department of Homeland Security in 2022. People, we all know these stories, right? Up in Canada, the
Yeah.
debanking. Rand Paul just talked about that this week. Um, and a month ago, about a month or two ago, here in Mexico, Canadian banks, I think Scotia Bank, right? I went to my Scotia Bank here in Mexico to renew my debit card, which had expired, using the same government ID that I've been using always in the past successfully, my multiple passports, Mexican and US. And they said I cannot renew my debit card for the first time using the same ID that I did last time, which was just fine. And they said I have to use my Mexican voter ID. I never took one out because I don't care about voting. And I knew that the Mexican voter ID would be the basis for the national digital ID in
Mm.
Mexico. In other countries, they'll use other IDs that are more
Yeah.
prominent in different countries.
Yeah. My
And that
home
was this,
country, Norway, by the way, already have had that for many years called all-in pass. Like it's basically like a digital pass that you have to use for everything from your taxation to your bank login and everything. So I've
yeah,
seen it. Yeah.
yeah, some countries are more advanced. And so, but that same week, the UN at one of the Summit for the Future, I think, they announced the UN wants everyone to link their digital ID to their bank account. And so here I am in Mexico where the bank is telling me you can't renew your debit unless you link your digital, they didn't say digital ID, that until you link your voter ID to your bank account. And so that's just an example of why I feel this is our biggest threat because you're seeing countries now, Kuwait, Vietnam in the last week just said if you do not now submit your biometrics, link it to everything digital ID and banking, your bank accounts will be completely frozen and your access to government services will be completely frozen. So that's already happened in Kuwait. It's happened in Vietnam. In Mexico, I just mentioned that what my
Yeah.
experience was part of that process. And so they're building this digital and the 15 and 20-minute cities, just the past week, UAE announced the master plan for 20-minute cities. England's health minister just announced 15-minute cities in Mexico this year.
Yeah.
These are all mainstream papers. They're talking about 15-minute cities. Mexico City is going to be divided into multiple 15-minute cities. And so I see this as our number one threat. And then some of the Trump administration, there's a lot of these technocrats in there. So I don't know if you got any thoughts there, but this is my
Yeah.
current first big threat.
Well, no, it definitely is a huge portion of it. I actually I think it was in 20 I was at 29 well at 2018 I did a whole speech at the Red Pill Expo with Jadra Griffin for what was it? No, I think it was oh yeah, it was cashless. Like this was before a CBDC was even a name. And so we talked about, dangers because I come from the Scandinavian country of Norway. Like we've seen heavily, it's not as bad as Sweden, but it's very close. We're very heavily digitalized economy. A lot of things that are very much controlling. They banned. Actually, Norway had to turn back as of recently back to cash and allowing cash because a lot of elderly people, had issues not being able to spend having a digital identity or any digital, either cards or anything. So they want to use cash. And so there was a lawsuit that actually appended it because the Norwegian constitution said that, it has to be equitable access to be able to use it, and they had to push back on it. But again, that is one thing. And then I did another presentation on the social scoring system back in 2019. I did a whole rundown on the social scoring. I actually told a story of me living in this was in Canada. I kind of put it in Canada, and I told the story of how I would live through that time. You got to tell stories to people, right? And I ended up hanging out and doing my going my way with life, and social credit scoring was fine, and I totally accepted it. And then suddenly I started to well, I got pissed off, suddenly by somebody wrong did me, and then I said something wrong, and then suddenly you're starting to get impacted by that score. That was convenient, and just told the story, where I then uh started to do some research on something. I think I saw something corrupt, this story that I created then. And suddenly I start doing a little bit of research, and I find this Jeter Griffin type of guy, talking about this crazy conspiracy theories about these people conspiring, doing different things, and so on. And then you get seen with that person, because this is actually the case in China, is if you get seen with people with lower score, like your score could potentially drop down if you spend time with them. And so, you get that. And then, the facial recognition is everywhere. You don't need, everybody was so afraid of, RFIDs in their skin, like little pellets in their skin. But you don't need that. You got the biometrics today. Like you got your, fingerprint, or your, especially your face. It's a big one now, right? So, with that, comes the creation of all these things, and it's very easy to implement it, by the way. Like I work in like in the industry that does cameras and alarm in my regular daytime job, and all network cabling and all that stuff. And so I see the capabilities that are being built into these systems. I don't have to use them, luckily, but they're built into their softwares, right? So when you set up the software, you could do tracking of, counting people in and out of stores, all of course, like complete recognition of cars and humans and so on. And then you get it a little bit more intrusive with they had mask algorithms, this came after, the whole COVID debacle. And then, they could track at construction sites, hard hat use and all this fun stuff. So it sounds, great. It's for, protecting us. But then again, we all know what technology does. It could be done for, you could start a great technology like blockchain to be used against you in a CBDC, or you could get more freedom, through other cryptocurrencies that are more decentralized, that, you can protect yourself with. But again, I think AI as well, that we just talked about, I think you could use it in both ways. They could be extremely sinister and evil AIs that are fully controlling and totalitarian in their ways. And we could have decentralized AI systems that could basically stop and stall, authoritarian regimes trying to control you as well. So I think the technology will be used both sides. But I do see now with the appointment of in Doge, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel being involved, that really worries me to a certain extent. It's great that he suddenly has turned libertarian, Elon Musk. Uh, but again, you gotta keep your spidey senses out there, because people that love technology also like centralization. You gotta remember that Musk wants an all-encompassing app. He's always talked about that because he really likes WeChat over in China, because that's their payment system, and that's how their scoring system and everything works. So yeah, no, you got to really keep an eye open. Here in Canada, they're just talking about digital ID and digitizing, your driver's license, your health cards, your passports, and so on. And this has been like an uphill battle in my home country, Norway. Norway is very highly technological, and we had, as I said, these type of passes already, where it's a digital identity that's attached to, gaining access to your tax account. Like Norway.no is the account. Like it's the basically to get all government services, you need that, but also for your bank account. It gets more and more convenient, to
Right, and
use all those
it
things.
just keeps expanding. But now we're moving to Europe is deploying it next year, the entry exit system. They're talking about that for the US. I've interviewed experts on that. Todd Miller, who 2021
Yeah.
said this, that he's a leftist, but he wrote a great book on the border industrial complex. And he said he's gone to these expos and he realized what they're doing is scaffolding. And the US has built out offices to countries around the world, helping them create the same entry exit systems that's now coming online in Europe, where each country now, if I'm a citizen of Mexico, I will be at the behest of the government. I will, like what we saw in Australia during COVID, you had to ask permission to leave.
Hmm.
It's going to be that type of, so it's not just going to, everything that we talked about, cashless, digital IDs, QR codes, blah, blah, blah. And then you're going to have permission to exit Mexico. Then you have to have permission to go to where you're going. Because now I have a Croatian passport, but if you're not an European now, there's two things. You have ETIAS, which is going to be go online. So if you want to go to Europe, you have to now pay 10 euros, fill out a social credit form, and ask for permission to go to Europe.
Yeah, I got ESTA. So me as a Norwegian citizen, I'm a Norwegian citizen. When I go to the US, they got the ESTA. And they're asking you all those questions, and they have a little optimal, no, optional, sorry, little thing called share all your social media, which I never do, but again, it's optional right now. But they want to know on top of that, it's just a cash grab right now, basically, because you kind of they would know that pretty easily if they just search on you. But again, those things, and they're coming for like my family from Norway traveling over here too. They have the same thing in Canada as well.
Right. So it's going online in Europe and Canada and
Yeah,
US. And then they could potentially say, oh, we don't like this guy. He's a dissident. So we're not approving his ETIAS. And then he cannot come to, or my family can't come to Europe. And then when you get there, the entry exit system now, where they're now going to take your biometrics. You don't
yeah,
have a choice. And so, and then you've got the EU asset registry, which they're talking about, right? So they want you to if you've got a bicycle, a car, your gold, everything must be registered now at the Brussels
wow,
EU asset registry. They're talking about this, and then they can do bail-ins, they can just confiscate whatever they want, and so yeah, that's kind of the trajectory that we're headed toward. Again, a timeline. Who knows what the timeline will be like? Who knows if they'll be able to implement it as they, according to their white papers. The Weaponization Committee just published their 1,000+ page report, I think yesterday or the day before. I was scanning through it, and they had a large section on digital IDs. I think it was from the industry itself, and even in their own words, the industry. Again, there's a lot of stakeholders here, right? There's corporations, banks, fintechs, governments. The way they speak is they are never going to stop implementing this. They are relentless. They're
yeah,
just going to keep coming back. We'll smack them back. They'll come back again.
yeah,
And they cited Mexico as an example. So they are having hardships implementing this. They say it's going to take time. They're going to have to use all sorts of different. They said in that report that they will have to use a smorgasbord. Like you mentioned earlier with the elderly, they'll still have to maybe leave some cash, but then they'll
mhm.
bring in the digital ID, and then the banks they'll have the banks at their end try to implement it, and so yeah, that's kind of the future, and I guess it's up in the air how it's going to turn out, but it's just not looking good though.
But your key word there is relentless in my view, because I actually, I don't know if you knew, but I created a list of the Young Global Leader Network for fun, and there's now 3,700 members of that network, and it's a 5 year Harvard class that they go through and everything. So it's not that you just get selected like Tulsi Gabbard like to say. I was like, oh, they just selected me, like I have nothing to do there. Well, she's in office, and but that whole network, those people are high performing people. You got to remember, like as you said, relentless. Like these guys have a high work ethic. They're committed, to do this stuff. Like they're situated in all the different positions all around the world, and top CEOs to the NGOs to professors. They're everywhere basically. And of course in government, there's a lot of we got like six of them here in Canada, in the ministerial position. Well, now we got Chrystia Freeland just quit here
You'll probably
the
you'll
other.
probably get the eminent what do I call him? The eminent Davos man, Mark Carney probably will be the
That
new.
is so that is a big danger for me because I know who Mark Carney is, and this is an interesting case. So I asked, this is AI. We're talking about AI now. I asked ChatGPT, ChatGPT, give me a full bio of, everything that Mark Carney has done. And so, it gives me the Bank of Canada chief, the Bank of England, his former time in Goldman Sachs. And then I'm like, I know better. Like something is missing here. And I look, it's his position at a little place, a policy group called the Financial Stability Board. And it's a group of 20 central bankers that sit there and they created the bail-in regime. They were the ones that created that legislation that then got put into the standard setting bodies in the G20 countries. And so he let that out. And so I started to like interrogate the AI. It's like, why are you letting this out? This is a very important. And then I kind of explained the FSB created the bail-in regime. Like, isn't that a little bit more important than, a little local policy behavior of a central bank in Canada? And then it's like, yeah, well, you're right. And I'm sorry that I missed out that.
He's also Bilderberg, right? Don't forget Bilderberg. He's
Oh yeah,
also
yeah. Is he sitting in the steering committee there? I forgot, but
I'm
he's
not
definitely
sure if
Bilderberg
it's
though.
he's also on the board. Not
Yeah.
good for some of us podcasters of Stripe also. So
Oh yeah, that's another way to attack you, right? Like the payment mechanisms. And we saw that firsthand. Like I was a part of alternative media with Josh Sigurdsson back in the day called World Alternative Media. We got, demonetized first, and then we got basically censored and then thrown out of YouTube. And so we've seen that censorship, industrial complex. And they will come after you and cancel you. And we saw that, during the trucker convoy, what they did with the truckers there in Canada. Um, they really deeply like hate people that have views that they want to be individuals with their own rights because these people are, collective in the mindset. So it's like for the greater good of the collective and their authoritarian idea. So they don't like, the thinker that, thinks for himself. That's pretty dangerous because, you can make other question things. And then, their whole idea and scheme that they, thought was the greatest idea in the world is kind of falling apart. And so I think like the danger is that there's still these infrastructures out there. Like everybody seemed to be like, oh, Trump got in, everything is fine now. It's a perfect kind of uh, way of like it started to get a little bit too much pushback in the United States. Now it's time to throw Trump in again, to make people just relax a little bit, and then they could work a little bit, and then they get in some pretty interesting people there, as we just discussed, right? So they could, work on, and it's easier to implement something when Trump likes them, because he has a lot of supporters that, well,
well, I
yeah, go
mean,
ahead.
here's the latest example where I just wanted to pull it up. So,
Yeah,
end wokeness. So I feel like, Trump is a globalist, or the people behind him are, and they're using him as, because you don't have he's a billionaire, and you've got a lot of these accounts that are the grunts of Elon Musk, the Benny Johnsons, and there's one called End Wokeness. It's got 3 million views. And so Trump a few weeks ago. So again, he's for me, his goal, his job is to sell the same agenda to the conservatives as a
yeah,
deception. And so, North American Union, for example, that's one of the many globalist plans, right? Projects. The Canada is all down with it, right? Trudeau government. The Mexican government is down with it.
yeah,
AMLO, López Obrador, repeated over and over during his presidency, we need to copy the EU and integrate Canada, USA, and
yeah,
Mexico. Scheinbaum is down with it. And so Trump came out a few weeks ago and said, so he's using the nationalist conservative lingo
yeah.
to fool us. He's talked about 15-minute cities. He says, we'll make freedom cities. And the conservatives are like, yeah, and, they're like 15-minute cities, bad. Freedom cities, oh, good. Uh, and then he's like, we should make Mexico and Canada the 51st and 52nd states because we're giving all these subsidies, right? And then like, if you like stop and think, you imagine like Trump comes out, let's do North American Union. Everyone's like, no, that's globalist, bad. He's like, Okay, let's make Mexico and Canada the 51st and 52nd states. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
same thing. And so and
Yeah.
wokeness just tweeted because they're talking he says tweeted a map of Canada, USA and Mexico where it's all like blue, meaning it's all part of United States, and he says we have 2 years left to bring this map to life in time for our 250th birthday. And there's a lot of talk now of
Oh, there you go. That's
taking the Panama
yeah.
Canal and Monroe Doctrine 2.0. And basically, my comment was North American Union sold as MAGA Monroe Doctrine 2.0.
Interesting.
I demand better psyops, and it's just so I feel and no he's trying to make technocracy cool with Tony Stark, aka Elon Musk, and
Yeah.
so there is some room for nuance. Some of these technologies aren't bad,
Oh, of course.
but again, the globalists are very insidious is the key word here.
Mhm.
So they're very insidious and they play a long game. And so we've got to like keep our eyes peeled non-stop.
Yeah, do not fall for, like the great leader that's gonna save you. That's a big one because we've seen that throughout history, how bad that has gone. Several times when like during, the Great Depression and, with the Weimar Republic. I have a little bit of a thing back here, 10 billion Reichsmark to show for it. And, they got like there was a massive economic downturn that happened. And then people were looking for those type of people, to save them because they lost everything. Like a lot of people lost everything in the Weimar Republic hyperinflation that happened there. And so I foresee, with what's happening right now is that there is a massive ongoing financial crisis, and it's not, like everybody's saying America is great. Just because the dollar is strong doesn't mean that America is strong. There's so much, like when I traveled around just recently, I went down to California and to Nevada and so on and Arizona to meet a few friends, and when I traveled around, like it's not all amazing things that are going on. The homeless population is growing because of higher inflation because they create too much currency into circulation. And you see this in all the major cities. I drove through like LA on my way up to visit Jadro Griffin back in March, and LA is like I couldn't believe it, like how bad it got. Like the road signs on the highways was tagged down. Like it looked like it was like a city that was falling apart. Um, and so I think this is an interesting thing though, is like you see the countrysides are more like nicer and more taken care of, I find the cities are completely falling apart. Is that a part of like the whole cycle, centralization, decentralization, the whole pendulum that is swinging over it? Like, do you think it's actually like that we're, starting to edge up on the centralization portion of it? They're trying to push quite further, with the 50-minute cities, the CBDCs and so on. But do you think we're getting to a point where that's kind of falling apart? Because when you centralize a lot of things too, you become very dependent on things, on the supply chain and so on. And you saw that during the lockdowns that they did, how these supply chains just broke down completely. And, you couldn't get things. Uh, but but I see like this whole thing where the cities are basically because when you have cities, you have a lot of people living together and it's more of a collectivist high mindset, the cities. The countryside, people live by themselves, they're used to and not having to depend on everyone. Of course, people help each other, but that not that. And then you see it on maps everywhere. It's not just North America, the voting maps, that are voting kind of in, more individualistic. It's in Europe as well, and in Asia. So I think we're kind of hitting a pendulum where this totalitarian elitism and globalism is kind of like it's starting to edge quite up on the centralization pendulum. And maybe we could hope that, it would swing back again, but I don't think it's gonna swing back with a leader of some sort, like a great leader, that's gonna save everyone. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I feel like it's a state of flux. We used to have back in the day 80% of people rural, 20%, something like that, right? Urban. And
Yeah.
now that's flipping. They're saying in the coming decades, it's going to be 70, 60, 70, 80% urban, 20% rural, which is what they want. Have us all like cattle on the farm, on the urban
Hmm.
globalist farms. And so I think that's their goal. They're also contending with incompetence, right? So I think it's a little bit of everything. You've got these massive cities, totally incompetent politicians. So that's one reason. And, corruption, money is just disappearing. So incompetence is one reason for the collapse of cities. The other is part of it is intentional. I was on a chat earlier today, and we're talking about the migration in Europe and the chaos that's creating the crime in general. And I think that's also the intention of the elites because they want us bogged down with crime. They
Yeah.
want to erase the middle
Stabilization.
class,
Yeah.
right? A great reset, erase the middle class, create neo-feudalism, 99% poor serfs,
Yeah.
plebes, and then the 1% aristocrats. And then we'll be just poor, scrounging for pesos or dollars,
Yeah.
having to deal with crime. And that's just going to keep us fighting with each other and never being able to get up. I mean,
Which.
again, these are the goals. And I read a piece from Bloomberg not long ago talking about it's kind of like Elysium, the movie with Matt Damon,
Hmm.
right? This idea of they have their city states, the elites. They've got their walled off, gated communities with high security. That's here in Mexico. Like, there's different classes. I live in a middle class gated community. You go down the street, there's open houses where I used to live in a not in a gated community, not far away. My home was burglarized 3 times, right,
Yeah.
until I left. So then you've got low class gated communities, middle class, and then 5 minutes down the other way are the Mexican millionaires living in these big gated communities. And the Bloomberg article was talking about South Africa. You're seeing, a lot of crime in South Africa, all that stuff. You're having an increase of the wealthy in South Africa create these elysiums, right? These private gated communities with their own water and security, and they're living nice. Everyone else is screwed. And the article said that this is a global trend. So this is happening in the UAE, in Brazil, in the United States, Mexico, and so I feel like that's part of that trend. So they'll try to get as many people into the urban 15, 20-minute cities. They will be in their private Elysiums, and that's their goal. But there, I think whoever can and is able right now since COVID, they've been trying to get to the countryside, right?
Oh yeah.
You're
Yeah. There's
seeing,
been a huge trend. I've seen a lot of people moving out here where I live. Like I live about 80 kilometers outside of the metropolitan city here. And you see that like people are trying to get out and trying to get out of the way or get out of the country, a lot of times because they're like certain countries are just falling apart by massive amounts of debt and ginormous government expenditure, right? So you're starting to see that. What's interesting here, talking about 50-minute cities, is we recently had an attempt here, like a coup d'etat, basically, of something called Winnipeg 2050. They call themselves. It was an NGO, and they came on the radio talking about how great, the Winnipeg metropolitan region is going to be. It's basically all the municipalities surrounding our metropolitan city, and so they wanted to add all of those and then take away a whole bunch of rights. They wanted to, like, oh, you can't have a Vel, like if you live there, you can't, like be more independent, right? And so I tried to do that. And I remember the lady, the head of the NGO came on radio, and I had a big argument with the radio host at the time. And I'm like, she's coming on there. I used it. So this is something good from AI, by the way, that I really like to use it for, is I take and ask AI. So I took their whole like 150 page document that they had, and then I asked AI, it's like, can you find me exactly? Because they said like, oh, 50-minute city conspiracies, like she was like, oh, that's pure conspiracy that they have anything to do with it. And so I asked, can you look through all that and then go and look at 50-minute cities policies? And then tell me I want the exact wording. I don't care about if it's like off or anything. I want to find the exact wording from the two, combined. And I found like 5 points. So there you go. And then I basically said it back, and then the host is like, got all like frustrated. It's like, well, let me contact you with our they want to interview you today at the the global TV station that's here. And then this lady contacts me. It's like, yeah, we really would like to contact you. We got to do it right, in an hour from now. And it's like, of course, I don't have like a lot of research, but I'm like, I'm gonna just use AI. And then I did. I had all my talking points ready and everything, and then suddenly she calls me. It's like, oh, we don't need you now. But there was a good thing that came out of it. I have a lot of local groups that I talk to, and we were able to stall in several RMs, the actual implementation of this. And so they have to have them all to work. So what ended up happening, it's scrapped for now, but they're rebranding, they said. Yeah. So as
Yeah,
again, relentlessness. Like they'll come back.
it's it's funny you mentioned Winnipeg. I was just at the beach and we met a family from Winnipeg.
Oh,
But yeah, like I learned only 4 years ago that where I live in Mexico it's a 15-minute city, but it's called resilient city. So they're using these
yeah.
synonyms of resilient city, aka 15-minute city, sustainable city, 20-minute city, and they just simply rebrand. But that is their project. Yeah.
Well, they have to because remember, like, what was it? We got Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. We got their ESG, SDGs, and then now, what was the latest one? There was a future, like the UN
Summit of
just
the
came out, right?
Future, and then I think it's Agenda 2045 or
Yeah,
2050,
because
so.
they got to rebrand every time they get exposed enough. They seem to want to rebrand it a bit because there's too much of a
But
opposition.
I feel also that they are getting to a point where they're taking the mask off and they don't care anymore and they're just going forward. I
Oh,
mean,
that's yeah.
you look at like Starmer in UK. Really,
Oh,
UK is
big
just
time.
it's becoming vicious, fascist, and grannies arrested for thought crimes. They don't care. They're implementing the net zero. I call it death zero. The ULEZ, right? If you leave your home every day, they want to charge you £10 or something with the they're just going insane. It's airstrip one. Orwell, I think Orwell knew about their plans and they're implementing it, and they're at a stage where the mask is coming off and like, we don't care, we're implementing this
Yeah.
dictatorship.
Well, yeah,
Here you go.
you got that with C40, right? Like the C40 cities. What weren't didn't they go so crazy in that they were talking about how much you could wear for clothing and what you could eat, I think. They were like three pieces of clothing. Oh, and you can only travel like once a year. Like they're really,
Well,
yeah, as you said, they're really like yeah,
I mean, that's the other thing now. In my bank app in here in Mexico, they have, they did this happened maybe within the last year. They updated, they're always updating the software. One day, voila, you have got the sustainability tab, and you open it, and it's a carbon footprint checker. And I use mostly cash, so they don't have a complete carbon footprint on me.
yeah,
But whatever little that they do, it says I cost 1,000 kilograms of carbon emissions. It's trying to track my energy use, my car, gasoline. I pay with cash, but then it says, please upload your receipts for gasoline so we can better calculate your carbon footprint. And I just imagine that now it's just an informational stage. Phase two will be, oh, you bought a steak this week. Oh, you want to buy a second steak. Um, I've been using the example recently in my head of, let's say I go, I used to go once a year to the US. Let's say I buy a $500 return trip ticket to the US, $500. Okay. Now I want to buy another one. I want to go for a second time within the year to the US. It's going to say $500. I'm inventing this, but I think this is the
yeah,
general gist. The carbon tax is going to be 500 additional dollars because you've reached your emissions limit. So now it's going to cost $1,000 to go a second time. If I want to go a third time within the year, they're going to say, okay, the ticket price is $500, but now it's going to cost $1,000 carbon tax. So it's going to cost $1,500 to go for 500. So the wealthy, going back again, the wealthy will be able to pay
yeah.
these carbon taxes no problem and continue living as they do, but the middle class and poor
Yeah, they'll
will
fall
be
down to poverty. Like you
will
will have that
be locked
feudalism.
in.
Yeah,
And we're seeing that already. Associated Press, last week, new dietary regulations. I think FDA says you should eat more beans and less animal protein, less meat. There was a guy in UK who put out a video not long ago. He tried to buy four packs of tuna. The registered cashier passed the first three and said with the fourth, sorry, the system says I cannot sell you the fourth tuna, and so these things are starting
Yeah.
to
Well, there was a
slowly.
test. There was a test during COVID, by the way, like during the lockdowns. They had those restrictions there where they're like, oh, you can only buy X amount of items of these things. So they started to kind of ration, and they of course blamed, the supply chain and all that stuff. And so it was a great test, I believe, to, first digital ID. They got actually here in Manitoba, they had vaccination, ID. They created that. Like, so you had a vaccine card, I couldn't go anywhere basically during that time. I was, that really, you really got to feel the start of the digital gulag, at that point. So, um, yeah, they're really like that was a great tri balloon. And then, of course, it was another great tri balloon of destroying the middle class, by destroying small, medium-sized businesses. They had different regulation than the big boys, right? So, they came after that. And then now again, they had a big postal strike here in Canada. So I feel like everything that happens is to destroy the small, medium-sized because like
Well,
they lost big time, especially in rural areas. People are dependent because, the big ones like UPS, FedEx, and Amazon, they're not, traveling all the way, to where I am. And so I relied on, post and I didn't get nothing on my mail for over a month actually. They were striking. So very interesting, the things that are happening where you have the entities, surrounding government because this is a crown corporation in Canada. And so it's, a state-owned enterprise. And so you have a lot of these movements. Now, uh, here's another thought. Let's go into some more geopolitics here. But
mhm.
it's, the global agenda. Like, let's keep that in mind, that global agenda, because it goes through this whole, like, oh, the Americans might not like the Chinese and so on, but they're working towards the same kind of implementation as the Chinese, with certain aspects, right? So it's this global move towards, the decentralized, control grids. Meanwhile, you have entities that are kind of like infighting each other while this is happening. Like, oh, good guys are bad guys, and I I think one of my main worries, Horia, is that we have a big geopolitical event, big. It could be a false flag or some crazy kind of sorts. They're trying now and with the drone thing in the United States, trying to build up, all aliens, all this crazy stuff. Um, I have a feeling that, you could also with the economic activity happening, where like you pay attention, so you probably know that, most of Europe is in a depression right now, economically, right? It's falling apart. People are getting more and more desperate. Like I talked to my family in Norway, they're getting less and less money. They were dependent on the government, most people there, because taxes was so high they couldn't save. Most people that, were from middle class and down, they couldn't almost save money privately for themselves, so they just are dependent on the government, that they had to pay into, and then they get something. And then my mom just called me and told me it's like, oh yeah, they cut down, $500 on my pension. I'm getting $500 less now, and so you were dependent on the government. Inflation is high, that's and debt is extremely high in Norway, and so you're getting this kind of depressive level. And in China, right now too, there's a massive real estate collapse, going on with real estate debt. Everybody was betting their shirt, and you got 600 million plus homes that, are not becoming to inhabited. And so that's a huge problem for valuations. And then that debt has been sold around the world and all this fun stuff. And then from that again, when you get that despair and economic problems, you know, uh, people are getting desperate for those kind of leaders that are more strong. And like that just happened in the United States with Trump. Like he promised to take care of the problems in the economy that people were feeling. And so I have worried that they're going to create some kind of event like to create a World War III, because I listened to an economics professor back, like it was probably 8 years ago, here locally, and he had a presentation talking about the Great Depression. And he said at the end of it, what really saved the Great Depression was World War II, because people, they started having lots of economic activity again. just murdering each other en masse, is great economic activity. Uh, you know, you gotta love these guys. They believe that, like murdering people is good as long as it's economic activity, it's fine, right? And so I have a feeling that something like that could really be the fast forwarding of really jumping, like leapfrogging, into a lot of these activities when you get, because in what was in I just read in Aftonbladet in Sweden, there's an article here that says about the war. This is the headline. Planning for about 500,000 Swedes will die. That is the headline. And the war, they're talking about the war in Europe. In Norway, they're talking about the war. And so do you think that, what could cause it? What kind of an event would it be? And second, do you think that would be the huge leapfrog that they could take advantage of to implement a lot of these policies? Because when you're under an emergency like Trudeau did, you're only supposed in Canada to do it during war, but he did it before. With war comes these totalitarian, like that's when the state becomes extremely powerful and controlling. Like, what do you worry about there? That could be a tremendous big trigger for a huge event of leapfrogging, and then taking off instead of like that slow, trickle of totalitarianism.
Yeah, just before getting to that, I was going to mention when we're talking about technocracy, one more
Please.
story I saw today. Israel biometric update. Israel keeps emergency biometrics measures in place more than a year into Gaza war. So again, Gaza war emergency, implement biometrics measures temporarily, and now they're permanent. And my comment was, states of emergency, for example, COVID, climate change, quote,
Yep.
war, will be used to install the algorithm ghetto. So we saw with COVID, pandemic, we saw Israel now using the pretext of war to implement that in Gaza and Israel itself with the Israeli citizens, climate green agenda being used. But on the war front, Alex Krainer, who I've had on my podcast, he's a fellow Croatian living in Monaco. He talked about London, a false flag being launched in London because the cameras went out. The what do you call those? The CCTV cameras went out for a long time. That's their modus operandi. I'm stuck on the fence. Well, let me step back. I read the elite's own books. I finished reading one from the 1970s. It was I got it right behind me. Outlines, I think, for World Civilization. He was like a disciple of H.G. Wells, part of the World Orders Project. And essentially, the guy says in his book, we need to depopulate, we need to install a technocracy, and we need to have a world government. And he lays out some scenarios where he says, I've been trying to write an article for this. Hopefully, I have it out maybe in January. But uh, he says that we could even have, and I've read this in other places from other elites themselves, that we can have um, um, a mini war or a war to finally get people to give up their national sovereignty. So again, their end goal is a world state. They want to use this third world war threat, um, you know, to get us to finally say, to cry uncle, right? To say,
Yeah, yeah.
okay,
Please help us. Yeah.
right. And he actually says that. So he says that we could have multiple wars. And so I think I've got like two scenarios that they're hyping up the threat of World War III. So if they could just use the psychological operation of the media with the headlines of World War III,
Yeah.
World War III, Putin's going to drop a nuke. Yes, no, maybe, blah, blah, blah. If that was enough to get us to give up our sovereignty and establish world government, they would do it. If it's not, so I can see one scenario where they don't fully go through with it, and the psyops are enough to get their agenda through. I could also see them where they're crazy enough, as you mentioned, it
Yeah.
would check off a lot of things. If they could drop a few tactical nukes, so it could sort of be like a mini World War III,
Like
or
EMPs, basically, we're talking about that point.
EMPs,
Yeah.
also tactical mini nukes to
Yeah.
take out certain cities. So that could happen. Um, and that could provide that could scare the global populace enough,
Yeah.
or they could do a more fully fledged third world war. You know, I believe nukes are real. I don't believe the nuclear winter theory. You know, I lived near the principal Soviet nuclear test site. I was in Kazakhstan for 3 years. I lived in
All right.
Semey, Semipalatinsk, which is 120 kilometers from the polygon, which is the principal Soviet nuclear test site. Stalin dropped the first bomb there in 49. They shut it down in 90. 500 plus nukes were dropped there. I went in there. It's a 18,000 square kilometer site called the Polygon, and I went. Kurchatov is where the base is with the scientists, and I went out with a few scientists. They took me to one of the ground zeros, which was radioactive, and I saw they built mock underground subways and metros and other stuff to test, you know, what the
Yeah.
blast would do. And so I believe, look, you know, nukes are real. I visited ground zero. I had two Geiger counters. I tested, it was radioactive where I was standing, you know. And so how do you explain
Yeah.
that if nukes are fake, right? And why would they, you know, spend all this half a century screwing around on this big patch of land trying to fake something? But the nuclear winter theory. So I kind of don't. I think it would be horrible. More people would die than World War II. We'd be able to rebuild, but that checks off depopulation, as you mentioned, for the economy. They can then build back better. They can bring in the digital systems. They can
Yeah.
install the new,
Just
or, you know, after World War II, they created the Bretton Woods
yeah.
global
Financial reset.
system.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So they could create Bretton Woods 3, which they're already talking about, Bretton Woods 3, um, and then install all these digital things because the old world has been done away with. And it'll also, they're against the traditional faiths, particularly Christianity, uh, and the monotheistic belief systems. So they could use that as a pretext to say, oh, you know, look at these crazy religions. We should stop with those. And, you know, they're pushing a one world religion as well. And so, you know, it could be with Israel going after Iran and then them using, look at these crazy Jews and Christians, what they're doing when, you know, in my opinion, that does not represent what real Christians should
No,
be
of course. Yeah. No.
doing, right? And so, but that would be a great pretext for them to say, Christianity, it's outdated. Here's our new. Elon Musk was recently talking about creating a new world religion. You know, Bill Gates gave an interview to Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn a month ago saying we need a new world religion. So again, these transhumanist technocrat class
Yeah.
are openly discussing a new world religion. So those are my scenarios. They can kind of try to fake the third world war scenario, do a light version of it, or go full on. And some of the guests that I've had on say the danger zone. We're not there yet, but it's more like the closer we get to 2030, like 2027, 2028, 29, 30. That's more closer to if anything's going to pop off, probably closer to that. And back to Trump, I've said
Yeah.
that Trump, I think one of the reasons they put him back in was he can sell a war with Iran or China better than Kamala. You know what conservative Americans are going to go die for you know, trans Kamala Biden administration? No one. But you know, if Trump is back, they can shape the narrative like the Chinese, the Iranians, and I think you'll get a lot of rah-rah MAGAs be like, okay, yeah, let's go. Fight the Chinese. And so I think again, Trump was strategically brought back in to check that box. And
Do you
so
think there'll be an event though? Because remember, 9/11 was very effective. Um.
I think they'll have to have
Yeah.
an event. A lot of it is cyber. Don't forget Cyber Polygon,
Oh,
right? So it'll
there's the
probably be like a cyber Pearl Harbor. They talk about that. Again, that'll check off the cyber Polygon stuff. And they always say it's the Iranian, Venezuelan, North
yeah
Korean,
China.
Russian, Chinese
Yeah, Russia. Yeah.
hackers.
Yeah.
So there's already been a documentary. I forget the name of it. I think I got it um, on my computer here real quick. Let's see if I can pull up the
Yeah,
name.
and there's lots of groups, you know, I've watched a lot of interest groups. I get a lot of emails from, you know, like there's certain groups that, you know, like, oh, China, evil, you know, like we got to take them out. And then you get the anti-Russian, you know, NGOs that are out there. So you have these people with, I guess, I don't know what kind of interest they have, but they, you know, they just want to take out the power, you know, that they see that could challenge the United States, right? And so it's just a imperial kind of thinking of, you know, like we gotta do a preemptive strike to take them out before, like see if we can turn the tide of the actual cycle of an empire, which is on, kind of the downslope right now, unfortunately, for the United States. And so, yeah, a lot of that could happen. But yeah, back to what you were looking up there.
Yeah, it's a 2016 documentary called Zero Days, and in it they talk about how Iran is going to do this cyber attack, and it's almost 10 years later, and we're seeing in the mainstream narrative them selling that same narrative that was talked about in the documentary. How, oh, it's going to be Iran, they're going to launch some cyber hack attack, blah blah blah. Um, but going back to what you're saying,
Yep.
we saw Syria just fell. And again, at play there is Greater Turkey, Greater Israel, and I'm still not convinced. I feel I've wrestled with this thesis for the life of my podcast, which was born out of my fascination with empire, geopolitics, and empire. I've had on, cultural historian Morris Berman. He lives down here in Mexico. He wrote a trilogy on the collapse of American empire. The late Johann Galtung, I had on twice on my podcast. He predicted the fall of the Soviet Union, and he said fall of American empire would happen by next year. But I've talked to people like Michael Beckley. He's a Washington wonk, and he says America will remain the superpower. And I've also entertained that idea. Nicolo Soldo, he's a geopolitical analyst, Croatian Canadian, I think, and he just gave a great speech in Brussels where he argues that I could see this also, that the globalist American empire is still going strong because you're seeing them win. They're winning, and he said that BRICS multipolarity is like herding like a herd of cats, and that EU, NATO, at least no
Well,
fan of EU.
there's no new ideas either. Like they're just copying, pasting the SDR.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm no fan of EU or NATO, but I believe Solda was correct. He said they're focused, they're organized, and they're winning. They're taking down um, all these different countries. They're going at Georgia again, Romania. They canceled the
Yeah,
elections.
I just saw an
You
interview
see,
with the presidential candidate. There was Doug Casey, had him on his podcast with Matthew Smith. I don't know if you follow them at
oh
all,
yeah, yeah,
but
I've had them both on the
yeah.
podcast. You mean they had Georgescu on the
Yeah,
podcast?
they just had him on the phone from Romania, talking
Oh
about,
wow.
the toppling. So you should see. I'll share it with you. It's a pretty interesting podcast to say the least. But yeah, you're seeing those events that are happening. But it's interesting. They're happening opposite as well. Like where you have other um, candidates that are coming in. Let's talk about this actually. There's been quite the stir, with a certain candidate and a certain guy, further down south of you, down there in Argentina. What's your thoughts on Milei? Because Milei is, supposedly an anarcho-capitalist, but then he's also Jewish, but which doesn't have to mean like people get so mad when somebody's Jewish, oh, he's evil, like he's the evil Zionist, but again, like he's doing a lot of interesting things, that are totally against this whole thing. He goes to the World Economic Forum, bashes them, for being a bunch of collectivists, and they're destroying, the humanity basically. And then he does the same at the UN. And so, yeah, with Milei coming in, and of course he hasn't had the power yet in Congress in Argentina, but he might now with the new election coming up. But what's your thoughts there? Well, he actually managed to turn around, a full-fledged collapse of the peso into a stabilization of it for a while, right now at least. And then he managed to cut a mass amounts of government. Like, what's your thoughts on Malay and his,
Uh,
puzzle piece into this greater, scheme of things? He's a big fan of Musk. We've seen that. Yeah.
yeah, my feelings are mixed.
Hmm.
I listen to him. So one thing, I think there's a technocratic strain. He's talked about AI, introducing AI for policing, some stuff like that. I just read today he's got a historic approval rating, 57%.
Yeah.
And so on paper, like what you just mentioned, we're hearing this news on paper that, he killed the deficit and all that. But then I think on the ground, the situation is still very bad.
Oh,
You
of
hear
course,
comments,
yeah.
you
There's
hear your
still lots
comments
of
from
problems.
Argentinians like it's horrible, it's still bad. So it's not as good as maybe Milei projects it to be. On the other, I've listened to him. I listened to him on Lex Friedman podcast for 2 hours. He gave an interview there not long ago, and I would have to say he's very intelligent, like more so than other
Oh yeah, yeah, very much.
presidents. Putin can speak at length. Sometimes it's not as interesting. Sometimes it is. Our American politicians, few can speak like that. And so, Assad was able to speak intelligently, but he's gone. And Milei, you can see this guy is very well read. And so I have to say he speaks very well. I listened to a short segment of another speech he gave recently. Again, he's very intelligent. Most of what he says I can't disagree with, right? So I think we're just gonna have to wait.
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
still early in the ball game for Argentina, and so it's kind of like the Bukele in El Salvador. He seems to have turned things around. Although again, I have reservations because Bukele, he's doing good things, get rid of crime. That's one of the top things. Okay, but then he said in an interview 2 years ago, he's like, we need to copy the EU and create a Central American Union, and so I'm like. Oh boy.
yeah.
And then he seems to have, they had this IMF deal recently, which you probably maybe followed that closer. I don't remember all the details, but
Yeah,
yes,
he took money from them, like he took another loan in SDRs, I believe, right? And
I
then
think they asked him to, I think he's got to sell the Bitcoin app in El Salvador. And so he kind of had to make a compromise with not all,
oh
but
yeah,
with,
I think they wanted him to stop having it legal tender and have it as a voluntary portion. Like this is what Milei has, now done in Argentina is he actually said that, you guys can use whatever you want. Like we don't have a legal tender anymore in Argentina, which is a good thing. Like you want competitive currencies and money and people to be free to trade with whatever they want to use as medium of exchange. So that's a good part of it. But again, like again in El Salvador is more like a dictatorship, collectivist kind of push that he did because he used the one guy dictatorship role to then push his agenda that he wanted, like, oh, Bitcoin is going to be, it and so on. And that's all great, but there's got to be choice, and the problem is these massive state entities, these collectivist entities are still there, and there's still structures remain, like it's not like they've removed completely these structures. Like there's still these old like Westphalian type of national states that, still have these government entities that are certain departments that control things. And I'm personally an anarcho-capitalist, so I would, you know, like if there was no government, that, be able to control my life and say what I needed to do. I would prefer for the local community to decide that. If you want a totalitarian regime to run your local community, go right ahead, as long as others on the outside could have completely different view on things and do their whole different way of life, and so on. And I would love to see that, but I do know the the power and money that when you control the money and the power, it's very hard to come with those ideas and be like, hey, I think what your ideas is stupid and dumb, and I want a totally different system, where we're more decentralized. They don't like that. It goes totally against all their beliefs, and they've been living it for a long time. They've been taught in school these Malthusian beliefs that comes from these writers that you've been talking about, right? And so when you get that ingrained in you, it's very hard to break that. And I've been trying on LinkedIn, by the way, talking to a lot of these higher elites. There's a lot of them there that I connected with, and I'm trying to throw ideas at them, and they were like, "Oh, I never heard this before." And then, interestingly enough, I met with a Swedish banker at the Red Pill Expo the other time, and he lives on an island in Sweden, which has all the rich people in Sweden, including the royal family there. And he was telling me he meets with these people. He meets with the richest bankers in Sweden. But what he was telling me is like these guys are dumb. Like these elites are very dumb. But this they have all these people around them, those young global leader types, the consultants, the people with the ideas around them, and they are the ones feeding them all this garbage about this. So there's a lot of elites there have no clue, unless they got, a guy like this banker, telling them that, oh, maybe your idea is, not so good, and maybe you should look at this idea. And so there's very little of that, in the higher up, the people with money, and so they're getting brainwashed into just, pushing all their wealth into these ideas, the sustainable ideas, the fifth, like they are getting consulted into using their wealth for these semi like under kind of class of consultants, that basically run the show and then tells them what to do. Like he was like meeting with the Swedish king, and he had no clue like what was going on. Like he was just like, oh, this is what, these people tell me. Like they don't even go and do their own research, a lot of these people. Like but they've been brainwashed in schools. Like again, but then also you have like rich people in Norway, for example, Crown Prince and Crown Princess. They were young global leaders. You have a lot of the richer guys in Norway. Three of them were young global leaders, and so I don't like there is I think like this guy believed that there's some hope and that you can come after these guys. Like he was at the time creating a website where he's going to show all the crimes that happened during COVID, for example. Like he has the money, so luckily he can actually go and put together these things and then show it to people. But again, he's probably one in 10, like I don't know what the number would be, but one in 1,000. Like there's not a lot of people that think outside of the box in the higher classes, because a lot of them has gone through the educational system and been brain. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. That's some background noise here.
No
But
worries.
um, that maybe if some of the elites are dumb, they maybe have an agenda and they just have
Oh,
these
for sure.
smarter people to sort of lay everything out strategically and carry it out. Um, but yeah, so
Yeah. Yeah, it can only, like as I said, you only hope like when you talk to people like that there's a few out there that they're talking about, but it doesn't seem like there's an abundance of rich people that are aligned with wanting to have a tiny controlling entity, locally and so on. There's not a lot of that out there in thinking. So the diversity of thinking out there is still very small and very collective. Now, I come from Norway, so like we are very well known for being a geopolitical power, with our henchmen, that are running around there, mostly from the Labour Party, which of course we all know that's very heavy left, aligning, guys like well, lady like Roland Brundtland, the basically the co-author of what turned into Agenda 21, our common future with more strong from Manitoba, by the way. So Manitoba and Norway, yeah. But I guess I gotta try to fight back against Manitoba and Norway. So you got Roland Brundtland, she was the head of the World Health Organization. She sits on the NGO, the elders, with several other
the
higher ups.
the musician, I like his music. Peter Gabriel, I believe,
Yeah,
is an elder,
yeah,
right?
and there's a lot of those. There's a few others. I think what's his name there from ANC as well was there until he passed away. Uh,
Mandela.
Mandela, yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not sure if Kofi Annan might be.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Yeah, Kofi is definitely there, I believe. But anyway, so you got her, and then you have um, Jens Stoltenberg. His dad was a steering committee with Kissinger back in the day. So Stoltenberg, he got an automatic in. I think he had to do like this is my theory. This is a crazy conspiracy theory that I have about Jens Stoltenberg coming from Norway, but I don't know if you remember our kind of 9/11 in Norway, the 22nd
Right.
of July, the shooting by Anders Behring Breivik, where he shot up, a Labour Party camp for youth in Norway. He bombed actually the building itself, the Parliament office building. He bombed that, and then he went and then shot up all those kids. Now after that, a certain guy called Jens Stoltenberg, he got, in and sat at NATO. And then guess where, he went to now? Now he's the head of the security, the Munich Security Conference. He also got a board seat. I think it's the chair now of Bilderberg as well. And so you see those guys, and of course he was connected to the old, control mechanism of Kissinger. Was a big player in that with his dad. Kissinger and Tolver Stoltenberg was very good friends. And so you see now his son, got automatically, like being able to get certain positions. And then of course you got second in command at the United Nations. No, not at the World Economic Forum, Birger Brande.
Oh,
He's
right. I
also,
call him Borg
yeah,
because he
Borg. Yeah.
recently gave a speech where he said, um, all your algorithms are belong to us. Well, he didn't say it like that, but he said we need an algorithm for the algorithms. We need to have again back to algocracy and
Yeah.
AI governance. He's like we need to have algorithms control everything, but we need to have a master algorithm to control the algorithms. So
Yeah, got to make sure, you regulate the regulators, it's kind of what the Financial Stability Board is in a way. Like it actually, you got the Financial Stability Board, then you got all these, like you got the regulators for banking, for accounting, for the stock exchanges, and for insurance under there that are like taking orders from the entity. And then so it's that principle. They bring that principle every single damn time they build stuff, and of course there's a book. It's you talk about those elites and how they think. Like there's a great book that I read. I don't know if you've read it or not, but it's called "The Redesign of the Global Financial Architecture," and the subtitle is "The Return of State Authority." That gives you. It's a guy that basically he came from another financial organization called UMFIF. So that's another NGO, financial NGO think tank. But he is running what's called the G30, no, the Group 30, which is Bilderberg for finance. So it's like all the chairs of the banks, all the top economists, and then was it all the heads of central banks? They all meet there and mingle and have events. And that's how I kind of learned about the Financial Stability Board, that they created because he was bragging about it in his book. He said it's way better than the IMF because in the IMF you got 167 whatever voting members there are. It's like, here we have only 20 people, controlling. And the word technocrat, you could probably mention it about 150, 200 times in this book. So they really love that word because that's their mindset, right? Like they're all technocratic and it's not just technology, it's just technocrat means also control because you need mechanisms, to have top-down control of everything. And that's how they believe in what they think in, right? So um yeah, I'm really worried and hopeful at the same time. I want to fight back as well. Like I'm not going to lay down, and get ran over by this authoritarian regime. You got to at least, put a little bit of a fight up, I think. So I try to, come out with podcasts like this, but also I try to put my actions where my mouth is, by trying to build now. Explained a little bit what we're trying to do with my Alternet project there, and so you gotta really fight back. You gotta speak up. If we don't speak up, it's game over kind of thing. Um, and so I think like critical voices that have a counter narrative of thought that are out there are very, very important for any future that we were gonna have. Because if the dissenting like it's I don't know if you heard listened to Matthias Desmond, but like when he said that when the dissenting voices disappear, the authoritarians have full control. And so I believe it's very important to put out the messages and of individual freedom and so on, because if you don't let the individuals be free to think for themselves, you get these top-down huge structures that want to control you because they do think that you can't think for yourself and you're dumb and you need to be told what to do. It's for your greater good, for everybody, because they know exactly what everybody of us needs, because they do seriously believe that whatever they think is a great idea, and that. because they believe that you need to be vegan, everybody needs to be vegan. You can't have like vegans and carnivores and people just eating normal food, whatever, right? Like that doesn't click in their head, I believe. I think it's just a pattern of thinking that, you get in these structures that have been made. But of course, there were structures that were created initially. And so, um, with that said, what is your thoughts on what we could do to, kind of fight back in a way and at least give throw in our hat in the ring and tell others what to do? What could people actually do other than, of course, like doing what we do here and have a great conversation with podcasts and all that stuff? There's what can the everyday person do to, really try to say like, no, I don't want to be a part of this.
Well, first off, I would say, and some of my guests say this as well. I've already exited and built. So spiritually,
Yeah,
for myself as a Christian, my life raft is Jesus, to get a bit metaphysical.
yeah,
So eternally minded. So I think that's one thing. Another thing is what you already said. We need to be meeting virtually, also in the analog
yeah.
world, in the salons, so to speak, in the coffee shops, like in the 17 and 1800s. A lot of the founders of America, that's where a lot of the ideas, just what's the word?
Permeated.
Permeated or gestated. I can't.
Yeah,
I
I don't know.
I work in three languages, so sometimes I forget words in different languages.
Yeah,
Um, so we need to, so that what we're doing, speaking about these ideas, airing them out. Um, I think it's important to pull our money from these globalists and their shops. I think that's very important. So that can delay a lot. So if enough people stopped, buying their subscriptions, going to the big box stores, consuming their garbage, put your money where your mouth is. People like Aaron Day talk about that. So I
yep,
think that is important. Support local people who don't buy big brand stuff. I think that's important. Being resilient. We saw with COVID that people who were able to be more resilient or did not depend on their job,
yeah,
who didn't have a mortgage to worry about and who would be like, fire me. I don't care. I'm not getting injected. Um, I think for the second time around, if you are able to be more resilient, you can say no and not comply. I think that was the problem with a lot of people. I didn't
of
have that
course.
opportunity. My contract just finished in 2021, and I was here in Mexico. But if anyone had told me, it happened to some of my former colleagues, both in Mexico and Kazakhstan, I was kind of like in the limbo where I didn't have that choice to be told. But if they told me in Kazakhstan or in Mexico, like, take this injection or you're fired, I'd be like, fire me, bro. I'm not
Yeah,
taking any injection. And so that's, I have guests that say you should have a rural plot of land, others that say that's not as important, some that say we should do more activism, get politically involved, others that say that's a waste of time. I kind of have mixed. It depends. A lot of things depend. I say people should focus on their locality. Try to make the world a better place wherever you are,
yeah,
however you can, without going like too crazy, right? Teddy Roosevelt had a guest years ago cite Roosevelt, do what you can with what you got, where you're at. It's really simple. I think a lot of these things are
yeah.
simple. People sell all these different in alt media, different courses and ideas and webinars and stuff, and it's just like a lot of this is common sense. And it's nothing new. I don't need a webinar in order to figure out how to survive. My grandpa was a prisoner of the Croatian Nazi regime. 6 years, 6 months in a hole in the ground. It's like he didn't need a webinar to, it's just kind of like it's
Yeah, no
a lot
kidding.
of this stuff is just common sense.
Mhm.
Live below your means, save as much as you can. If you can't buy a plot of land, buy gold and silver, invest, start businesses, network. I think it's important having a network is one at the top of my list. A lot of people
Yes.
look at expatriating. Sometimes I tell people it might be better to stay where you are
Yeah, yeah,
than
yeah. No,
to
100%.
expatriate to Latin America. You might not be the type of person that can adapt as easily. I'm the kind of person, drop me off in Mongolia in 6 months. I'm speaking intermediate Mongolian as I was, or I speak Croatian in Russia.
Yeah.
I can get by. I speak Spanish, and I integrate with the local cultures. And some people have trouble with that. But I mean, that's sort of the gist of it. I think it's good to be resilient and have one thing that is a lot on my mind is having a plot of land that's rural where you at least to have a well with your own water. You
Yeah.
can grow some fruits, vegetables, maybe have chickens and stuff like that. So if you do get debanked, you can survive. So that's important. And having a network is also key. I don't think the lone prepper is not a good idea. You're going to run out of supplies. You'll be alone. You'll always be outnumbered. So you need to have a network. Where I am in Mexico, I've got a network that I rely on locally here. I've interviewed Stefan Verstappen. Do you know him? The Canadian survivalist.
Oh,
I
I
had him.
thought you were talking about Formula One drive.
No, he's a Canadian
Yeah.
survivalist. He's kind of old now. I had him on my TNT show.
Oh,
He
yeah.
was well known
Interesting.
back in the day. And he says in their community, they meet once in a while. They never bring their cell phones. They do not have a name, but everyone, in their community, they have a role like medical people, food people, this sort of thing. And so, yeah, that's
Yeah,
sort of the,
I think that's very important. We semi have that in a group, and it started during COVID actually, during the lockdowns. I was looking for people, to be able to talk to here because I had a decent amount of group. I've been actively involved in politics, at one point here, and then I met a whole bunch of different people. I met some libertarians, so through that, I kind of like we kind of worked out the group that we had. But at that point as well, like we used Signal, for example, as a chat group, and it'd be like, hmm, like you look at what's happening with that, and then I'm like, well, I need to figure something out. And so like I think like what is great thing to have is think about decentralization of anything that you could think of. Anything from, how you take care of your food to your like to money to how you run, your local community to the communication to energy, everything. Like if you could look at how can I decentralize that in a better manner to make it more efficient and to be able to be way more resilient. Because I think like we got to remember what centralization hates and what's the complete opposite pole of that is decentralization. And so, if you can think of how can I take my current situation and decentralize it better, and that comes with the network, that comes with energy, that comes with everything. And if we can, I think AI could, potentially be a portion of this as well, where at one point, if we can get to a point fighting back where we could have small modular nuclear reactors, that could be taking care of a tiny little community, or you could have like, so wherever you live, right? Depending on what you live, you could have types of different types of energy that you could use if it's water, wind, solar sometimes. Uh, if we could decentralize energy, we're trying to decentralize money, right? I'm trying to, and I know a few others that are trying to decentralize communication. And so if we all focus our energy and time on, how we can decentralize and just basically bypass, these centralized entities that are out there with a lot of control, got the state has a lot of control, the ISPs has a lot of control, the corporations, the banks, they have it, but they have it in a central manner. And that's where their power lies. If you could disrupt that power by decentralizing things, I think we get quite far. Robbie. What is your thoughts on that?
if we can, I feel like they have a lot of their
Yeah,
hands on most of the levers of power. Um, but it's just, I think in general, we just have to do it. It's kind of like a Lord of the Rings type thing. It's our duty to sort of do this, regardless of how
yeah,
big or small the
100%.
monster is, and just sort of hope. spray and pray, as they say, and as in Counter
Yeah.
Strike
Oh yeah, I
terms.
used to play Counter-Strike. Yeah.
Um, and I thought about, I just had a few thoughts in my mind as you're talking about community,
Please.
and I've realized in some places these are not all solutions that can be applied everywhere.
Of
For
course.
example, I live in a more urban globalist setting, and I've realized that the community is not so tight because everything has been so globalist. I had a great guest on, Greg Copley of the International Strategic Studies Association. He's written a couple of books on this, and he talks about how the anywhere in the world, the big cities are globalist, cosmopolitan globalist.
Yes. Yeah.
Rural areas are, I guess, more sovereigntist.
Yeah.
Less
Individualistic.
globalist.
Yeah.
It's logical. And so I've seen this in Croatia where over 20, 30 years, I used to play on the streets as a kid in Croatia, and you saw kids on the street, everyone knew each other. I remember, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And now when I go to Croatia, it looks like the United States. Ghost town. It's a
Yeah.
ghost town. No
Well,
one's on the
same thing.
street.
I'm old enough that I saw exactly similar things like that in Norway.
and
So
and
yeah.
everyone's on their Black Mirror.
Hmm.
They've been atomized, separated, and so where I live are immediate. I mean, like my network is sprawled across the city, right? If I need things, people will come help. I'll go hang out. If I need something, I can go to people's places and stuff like that. But just by the nature of the technocratic society today, my local community it'd be hard to kind of forge
Right.
what you can forge in maybe rural Canada or other places, and even politics. Like I'm in Mexico, and if you're a politician trying to do the right thing, you literally get whacked. Like 40 politicians plus got killed so far this year in Mexico. So, like I mentioned this
Yeah.
earlier today in another chat, like, what's the point of me going to become a politician in Mexico? Because if I try to do what needs to be done, I'll just get killed. So that doesn't serve anybody.
No.
But maybe in your country or locale, you can, And so I was at a Ron Paul Institute conference last year, and I met one of they have also for students, they have a seminar for students,
Yeah.
and I met one of the guys. He had been a Ron Paul scholar as a young man, and then he just recently got elected to local office somewhere in the U.S. So that was kind of impressive,
Yeah.
So again, you have some of these success stories. So if you have the stomach for politics, we need people like that as well. I don't have that stomach. As soon as I finish grad studies in Geneva, I'm like, I cannot work within the belly of the beast of international UN, globalist satanic organizations and EU or my corrupt American government. I wanted to go work in a industry like education where I could do honest work without having to corrupt, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
my
Your soul,
ethics.
basically your soul.
So, but that's not to say,
Yeah.
if you have sort of that mindset and
Yeah.
passion, like this young man that I met, to work within this beast, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah, you could be
They'll
like
slow
right
things
now.
down. You'll be
Yeah,
you'll
right.
be a spoke in the wheel, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. You'll be like Thomas Massey is kind of the Ron Paul right now, right? Like he's, fighting back. He's done a few things actually good, like especially in his local, like where he's from. Again, local, right? Like he done a lot of good things there, and then he's just, sticking to, like his stick in the wheels, as much as he can, in the big belly of the beast, of course. So yeah, again, like you could have the stomach for that. Now I tried, that here in Canada with I had a Manitoba party, but then problem is like all the rats comes in into the ship, and I had like Elections Manitoba, which is our provincial elections body fighting us. Like they stole. Like we put in 7,500 signatures, and they said like, oh, wait, now 3,000 of those are null and void. Like that's ridiculous. Anyway, so like we had to then run candidates, and by doing that, we added a political advisor. Stupidest thing I ever have done. Um, because he's like, oh, you gotta water down, your message, you gotta do this and that. So I kind of like I know what not to do. So I think like the Millet approach, what Millet did, with actually being truthful and telling the people what they actually are, these corrupt bastards. Like he called them a lot worse names than what I'm going to say. But but again, like I learned from those mistakes where you like I let people in, people backstab you. They act like they're libertarian, for example. They try to join you, and then they basically come out on TV and spout the liberal platform and
Well,
you know,
look at the Libertarian Party with this guy Chase. What's his
oh
name?
yeah,
I was got through to him. I was gonna have him on my TNT show, but then I left the TNT. But I even Ron Paul, I think, like disowned. He didn't even vote. And Michael Rachtenwald was great, who I've interviewed. He ran and he said that there was backstabbing at the Libertarian Party,
yeah.
and they put in this Chase guy who doesn't seem to represent the Libertarian
Well, it seems like with
ideals.
the political system, it seems like it always sits with like how I was able to stop some of these people was by sitting on the executive board. But the wildest thing is like I'm a Norwegian permanent resident. I'm not even a Canadian, and I could start a political party and tell people what to do. Like I did that. Like I literally was sitting there. I created the policy and everything. And then the stupidest thing, as I said, was bringing all these people in because, oh, you got to run. Like what's the point of getting a person in power? Like when you could get people in power. And then of course you drag in people that, try to act like they are with you and, that they believe the same things. And then they suddenly just turn around. Like one of them was Justin Trudeau's best friend. You know, and Lloyd Axford is a former finance minister of Canada, his brother. Like these guys are just like leeches that come in and then try to suck you dry, and then basically destroy from it. And then you have mainstream media just writing article upon article, just how terrible we are and what a bunch of morons and crazy people we are. So yeah, I learned I just don't have stomach for that anymore. Like I just like this is ridiculous. Like I can't have a political system that I would support. Like being like that. It's just disgusting, in my view. So I kind of gave it up, but good for you if you have the stomach, as you said. Like some of these people have with through more like really good morals. Um, you could deal with that. You could be that squeaky, wheel and at least get the message out there, to people every now and then.
And you also have to have these days, unfortunately, money, which
Oh yeah,
you'd
yeah,
have to be a self-made man or I interviewed, for example, out in Australia, Michael Arbin, who he's a successful entrepreneur, businessman in Australia. He initially ran, I think, for the Senate. He didn't win, but then he's now a trusted advisor to Ralph Babbitt, and Babbitt was a successful. He was successful in real estate, and
yeah.
so you need that financial backing. So
Oh
again,
yeah.
I'm not a self-made man. I don't have the money to do that, and but I think today, at the very least, you have to have a pile of money to be able to be resilient in the
And,
political
yeah, and
process
that
to deal
and
with
that pile
media.
of
You know,
Yeah, and that pile of money, needs to not be dependent on anyone too. Like that pile of money could disappear on you if they have, the right entities, the today's tax authorities or wherever, right? Like could come after you and try to
I
at
mean,
least like slow
you'd
you
have to
down.
have sort of like a neutral business where
Yeah.
you keep having a cash flow, and then you can use that
Yeah.
money to spend in your political um,
No, for
campaigns.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely possible. And I don't think I personally would like to do anything like that, but I do like to stir up shenanigans, and kind of sabotage, these entities. So, you know, if my project goes well that I'm working on, I'm all for, creating or backing people that are willing to, stir the stuff around the world now. But you don't want to become, a Bill Gates or a George Soros, where you actually like they have their foundations that, they want to do certain things.
I mean, you could
Uh,
become a good George
yeah,
Soros or a
yeah,
good Bill
kind of, yeah.
Gates. We don't
Yes.
have many of those, if
No,
any
there's
at
not very
all.
many. Yeah, exactly. So, maybe that's a possibility. It's maybe it's a far-fetched dream or anything, but I think it's worth at least, working as hard as I can for, to try to become wealthier in order to, be able to do these things because you do need that wealth a lot of times to like, yeah, we have platforms and all this stuff, but it's also good to have those people because there's a very few of them, but there are a few, and they really are doing good things with putting their money and helping people get messages out there. So I'm all for that. Like and I think it's a good portion of spreading the word comes, and I think it's a good responsibility to take on. When you have money and you're part of society still, you want to try if you have that moral backbone that you want just the individual to have the freedom to do what they want in life. I think that is a hill worth dying on with uh having our good ideas, just trying to push them out there because I just wouldn't function very well in a totalitarian regime because I just don't it probably is the Christian in me as well where like I just have to speak up, I have to say something.
I just can't help not being a dissident. I
No.
just when the regime says no, you can't post that. I post it. I just can't,
Yeah.
good because it's the truth. I can't not
No,
post
exactly.
the truth. So
Yeah, no, I think that's important, and I think that the more we could just be truthful and share our own thoughts, like if that thought is something completely different of mine, that's totally fine. But I would rather live in a society where everybody could speak their mind freely, even if it's stupid ideas or good ideas. I think you should, thrive towards that. Norway is interesting where I'm from. It's like looked upon as free speech is paramount. And I kind of like that, idea. And that's probably why I have still a Norwegian passport. It's not for my tax purposes because Norway is a terrible place, to be taxed to death. But, the one principle that they have, if I ever get in trouble somewhere, the Norwegians likes to be like free speech, like so maybe they'll, try to be like, oh, John, we don't like what John is saying, but like free speech. Anyway, so it's I think there's a lot of things that could be done. So it's really important to do what we're doing here and having our conversation and then sharing, especially what you do with trying to build, something, a platform that people can come to listen to some what we think at least is pretty decent ideas of how we could live our lives as moral human beings and try to live a more truthful lives to what is good for us anyways because I do think uh being just free to do what you want I here's one thing that I like I like what Doug Casey says um do what you want but we're willing to take the consequences of your action. How about that? It's very simple. I do like those ideas. So I think it's important that we just keep on talking about those ideas and just keeps on going. Now, let's finish with this. Let's see where do you see like so next year we talk kind of the bigger picture stuff, but what do we see next year happening? Like we got a big event, geopolitically with the inauguration coming up on the 6th, right? And then who knows what the heck is going to happen. I'm very up in the air right now. Oh, here's an interesting thing. Let's talk about this. This is like totally stupid, but what about Trump's new haircut? Have
oh,
you
I haven't
seen
seen.
his new
No, I haven't
haircut?
seen.
Well, go and look up Trump's new haircut. Like it's literally like a military buzz cut. And Trump
You got
never
to be kidding me.
go and look it up. It's like wild. Like I don't understand why he would cut his hair like a military general. Like, like I've been in the military
He's
for a
getting
year.
ready for the role.
Yeah.
I see it now. Yeah, it
Yeah.
looks for a
I was like,
second kind of
oh,
reminds me of General MacArthur for some reason. Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was, it has nothing to do with anything, but like he just cut his hair. Like
Well,
he doesn't like always had the same damn hair. That's suddenly
he's getting ready to be the war
yeah.
president. I don't know.
Yeah, that's not a good sign though to me. Like, it's something as funny as hair, but it really triggered. Yeah, so that is but anyways, let's focus on next year. What do we see next year? Like there's a lot of threats out there. I think the economic threat is probably the closest one, that we might be facing. Um and so what's your, kind of what like 2 to 3 major things that you could see unfolding like the next year in 2025? What's your thoughts?
Um, Push again the escalation towards a war. Um, they might go after Iran. Um, Also in the Pacific with the theater of Taiwan,
Yeah.
the Middle East, and then it's still not certain what's going to happen with Ukraine. So war escalation. I could see again the threat of the technocracy again. That's just going to advance. They're talking about bird flu again. I
Oh
just
yeah, yeah, I've seen that many
came to my
places.
attention this 2006 TV movie about a bird flu pandemic, and the governor was Newsom, called Newsom in that movie.
Really?
And we just had Gavin Newsom declare bird flu emergency
Yeah,
in
I saw that. Yeah.
California. So again, they might invent some,
Hmm.
you know, health emergency. We could see an escalation in the stuff with Mexico because it is a bit of a crisis with the
Border.
cartels and
Yeah.
the migration. That can get out of control. And the economic situation, they do seem desperate. One of their ways of dealing with the debt is just killing people. So whether it was
Well,
the pump,
Canada's sorry to interrupt you, but Canada's really figured this out. You know, their MAID
I
program,
just read the headline. It's been a
yeah,
huge increase in
massive.
euthanasia.
Yeah,
And now they're trying to introduce that in Scotland and across the Western world. So they're pushing eugenics, euthanasia,
yeah,
um, increasing the pension age, decreasing pensions, the countermeasures that they introduced to deal with the elderly. Um, so yeah, the economic front can be a big one, which then they can use to push through their agendas, and that kind of yeah. There's David Roger Webb who talked about the Great Taking,
yeah.
bail-ins. I think the EU asset registry is part of that bail-in process. So they're just going to be trying to extract as much from us, and so we kind of have to work hard to, as you mentioned earlier, try to be decentralized, think out strategies for each individual, how to get your wealth, whatever you have, out of harm's way. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, again, decentralize yourself and, try to be more off grid and not caught up in central, control points basically with anything. Like now we're in Canada, they've been coming after, guns, for example. And some of the gun they came um after handguns. So they basically you can't have a hand well, you can have it, but you can't use it. Right now, like the people that actually were able to buy it. So it's illegal to transport or you do anything with it in Canada right now. They did the same with a lot of semi-automatics.
sounds
Um,
like Mexico.
oh, so they've been also doing similar things with that, eh?
I mean, it's long ago. There's only
Yeah,
one gun store. It's in the capital in Mexico City. It's a lot of
one gun
paperwork to,
store.
yeah, it's a lot of paperwork. It's a
Yeah,
mountain of paperwork to obtain firearms, and then the limit you cannot have the caliber higher than what the police have. So they've limited
of
the
course,
types
yeah.
of guns you can get, and then you're not allowed. Once you only get special permission to once you buy it. If you get your license, you go to Mexico City, you get the guns, they give you a permit like to transport it to your home, and then
Oh, it's the same
that,
thing here, yeah,
and then
yeah.
that's it. And you can only keep it in your home. You also have to be a member of a gun club, which is absurd. And so you could
Yeah.
only keep it at your home or take it to the gun club and back. It's just retarded.
Oh, so they're even worse than Canada at that point. That's yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah, no, it's that's interesting. So yeah, I don't know. Like I feel like it's like a slow grind, like they're working really hard, but I wonder if there's going to be enough collectively of people, that have dissenting voices. That I see a lot of movements now, like certain places. Like I was just attending an event just recently here, where they brought in Matthias Desmond to Winnipeg. I never seen that. There's never been like voices like that ever coming to Winnipeg. And I was like, holy smokes, I better go and check it out. And there was a lot of people. And what was interesting here is that the people, and this was during the lockdowns too, the people that actually stood up was the religious people. Mostly here is Mennonites, that came up from South America and settled on the prairies there. And so they really dissented, and they're heavy dissent. Like I met with that like heavy Christian group that I met with, and most of them are Mennonites, and they were like, "Yeah, we're not like letting the government step on us. We're gonna stand up, and
I've
they're not
yeah,
gonna."
I've interviewed a lot of the Canadians on TNT during COVID, or on my podcast, Pastor Arthur Pawlowski, Pastor
Yeah,
Henry Hildebrandt, Dan Bulford, former RCMP, who I think was part of Trudeau's detail, Dr. Stephen Malthouse, the nurse Kristen Naglin, um, Mark Trosey, who does great work, Doctor. A lot of the Canadians, and but there was that story recently of the Rebel News was covering it, how these Amish in Canada,
yeah,
they went back and forth over the border. I mean, it's just the craziest example. Like for me, it's just mind blowing. They don't have smartphones or electricity, and they were supposed to have the ArriveCan app, and they crossed the
yeah,
border, and the whole entire community owes 300 grand, and then the government put liens on their properties. So in theory, they could actually sell their properties to get those fines, and then basically they would destroy the Amish community. And I think that's their purpose, is to
yeah.
destroy any
Independence.
alternative
Yeah,
to the 15-minute city. And so again, that goes back to my point, is that they are very far advanced. All is not lost. We just got to, we do what we can.
yeah.
Um, but I guess what was my other point? I mean, they are far advanced. And I'm a Christian, so I think prophecy spells out a lot of this, that it's things will just progressively get worse until the end times, and that's something we also have to deal with. Jesus said that it's going to progressively get worse, and it's going to be, you know, a period of history that's it's never been this crazy, this bad, right? And so, again, it goes back to what I'm saying. You have to be mentally,
Yeah.
psychologically prepared to deal with these times. And some people, I think that I had a friend that studied with me in Geneva, an American, and he told me, he told his friend, he woke his friend up, gave him the red pill. He learned all about this stuff, but then he had like a nervous breakdown, his friend, and he couldn't handle it. And he was like, was the name Cypher in the Matrix? Remember
Yeah,
the guy who became a traitor? And he's like, I want the blue pill again. And he made a deal with Agent Smith, and in the end,
yeah.
Agent Smith killed him. He's like, so his friend was like that. He took the red pill, was okay for a while, and had a schizophrenic breakdown. He couldn't deal with this insanity, and so he had to take the blue pill again. And
Well,
so there's
it is kind of tough, like there's been, you got to wrestle really like hard with your mind a lot of times. And, I remember during COVID, there was, like, I remember the family on my wife's side, there's constant on me, for being a dissident, like not following. Like they're all government workers here and, all into like
and you're
the health
messing with
sector.
their conscience.
Yeah,
You're the person, like they have this cognitive dissonance, this
yeah,
Stockholm syndrome, and you're there reminding them, and they're like, no, this can't be true. Stop.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, so, um, you just gotta, like, again, that mental portion. I think it's very important because we lost a few people that way, and group of people that have been dealing with wrestling with this type of ideas for decades. That just couldn't handle it anymore. It got too dark for them. The future and everything. But I think if you have a true belief in, as you said, you follow, the Jesus himself, and that's what you believe in. I don't think anything can stop you really. Um, when you're true to yourself and true to an ideology that has very strong moral backbone that is good for everyone. Like it's not that it's like, oh, hate on everybody else. No, Christianity has very good values. Like let's just
Love your
be
enemy,
serious
right?
about
Or
it. Yeah,
some belief or something that is sort of outside of this place that
yeah.
they can't get
No,
to,
because
you know.
because in these central entities, the God is them, and whatever government they have or entity, right, that they create. And so they have to eradicate any other thought that believe that any other thing, could be higher than that entity that they create. And so,
You go back to Roman Empire or whatever,
yeah,
they just
no, of
they were
course,
not happy with the Christians because the Christians would not submit to the idea of Caesar ultimately,
yeah,
because God was above Caesar, and they're never going to submit to us.
yeah, yeah, those bastards.
Yeah.
No, it's a good way to be. So, try to find that moral strength, I think. And a lot of people find it, of course, in being, believing in something higher than themselves. And I think that's really good. It's not something that's bad whatsoever. It's actually good to believe in something, that is eternally higher than yourself. Because if you do, you then get the strength to be able to do this kind of stuff. Because if you fall out of that and you don't have, that higher belief in something, like it's it gets pretty tough for people, I believe, to be able to stand up against all this totalitarianism around them. But again, they're just people that can do it. That I know people that are not atheists per se, but they are more like they just live a very strong, like they're more stoic, like a very hard backbone of moral that they have as well. So you just need to have good morals. That's just it. If you can have good morals, I think you get very far in life. If you start to, do all the stuff that we were talking about, from decentralizing, and having a network and all that stuff. I think that moral backbone, and then if you can teach your kids, because they're going to live longer than you if you have kids, right? So I don't have kids, unfortunately, but I try to teach, kids that I know in my surroundings, at least to have those good moral values. Not that they get taught in school, today it's wild. Like I just had a discussion with a hockey team where the kids are just complete crazy. They just because the teacher's like, oh, like you can't say anything to the kids, do anything, and so like you just end up with that type of behavior, and then you see youth crime and everything just takes off because their parents had no moral values. Yeah, of course it's tough with being poor and all that stuff but if you have those moral values, even the poorest Christians, have good moral values and are trying to keep society together. And when that disappear, the innate human connection and value, you take the humanity away that a lot of authoritarian regimes does. That's when you get a collapse of society and the control that takes over. But have moral values, love thy neighbor, all that good stuff, and then just if you take care of yourself, you might be able to help take care of others as well. And so, the more and more of us that believe in good values, and we're not trying to preach from a higher, plane here, but I think personally that that you let the individuals do whatever they want with their life. I think that's just the most empowering thought that exists on this planet. So, anyways, I'm gonna end with that, and that maybe if you wanna close with a few words and thoughts, before we say goodbye, it would be great as well. I'd love to hear some good final words, anyways, because there's a lot of darkness, but there's also a lot of good positive things that you could take out of our conversation, I think.
I guess my last thought, I was just thinking, I enjoy the fight, being on the landing ground, in the battle, because I think in many ways it's our duty to speak truth, to speak against evil, to uphold, as you said, ethics, morals,
Yeah,
you know, in everyday examples. Like you shouldn't pay a bribe if you're ever asked to. I worked in education. There were schools that passed students who failed, kind of like communist style. And I worked in schools where, I was able to uphold the law, right? To apply the just law. I had a student, with the passing grade was 70. I'd have students where I failed at 69, 68, and they'd come in, beg, and I'm like, if I switch your number from 69 to 70, that is immoral, right?
yeah,
That's cheating. That's wrong. And so I think that's the kind of attitude that we have to have. And just going back again, I think we have to push against the tide. I mean, you mentioned children. We have to educate to have to educate children that would be like us to continue to push against the tide because ultimately it's like a huge wave of evil. If we don't do anything, it's just going to roll right over us and just
Yeah.
going to be insane amount of evil all around us. And so we have to keep, it's never going to go away.
No.
So we just have to keep pressing back against it. And I've just found it fun, having a go at the beast. All the giving it a little, little cuts, 1,000 cuts, and being found important enough by elements of the system to come after me. For me, that's like, oh wow, really? I was able to, you know,
Yeah.
uh, get you angry, right? When the
Yeah.
DHS takes me from PayPal or I get deplatformed
Yeah.
on Patreon, I'm like, cool, that's awesome. What else can I do, to get them,
Yeah.
up in arms? And so I think that's sort of the attitude. And I was like to say, laugh on the way to the gulag. I look at history. Read a lot, look at the past heroes, so to speak. I look at Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor. He fought against the Nazi system, the totalitarian Nazi regime. He had escaped Germany. He had been in New York. He could have stayed in safety. He had a fiancée. They were going to get married. And he's like, no, I have to go back to my country. Went back into Germany and participated in the conspiracy to try to assassinate Hitler. The war ended. He had been in a jail, and the war ended. And even then, the Nazi, imagine the pain, the anguish, where the war is finished, he's in the jail, and they still hanged him,
Yeah.
you know. Or Richard Wurmbrand, who was held in a Romanian communist prison for 14 years. And he always, you read his books and biography, he had a joyful disposition in prison, being tortured.
Yeah.
And what's mind-boggling, that's a great testimony. The guards would be like, "We're torturing you, and you're smiling," you know. And he's like, "I was like, what's going on?" He's like, "I was put here in prison in this moment to preach the gospel to you." And some of these guards actually became Christians. And it's like
Yeah.
that attitude of a Richard
Oh yeah.
Wurmbrand or Dietrich Bonhoeffer, or find some other such figure of
A
having that joy.
warrior of peace.
Yeah, this joyful,
Yeah.
content disposition. I think that's something to
Yeah.
uh, aspire to, and not get. Uh, don't let the bastards get you down, as they say, right?
No, exactly. If you let them trample all over you, it's very easy to get discouraged. But I'm become like you now, where it's just fun. Like it's just pure fun, like poking at it, and you know, when you're not afraid anymore, too. Like, don't be afraid of this because it's a cycle of life, and if you're true to yourself and true to whoever you believe in, it's quite fun and it gets quite entertaining at times and use a lot of humor. You gotta have, as you said, laugh way to the
And
gulag.
and kill, the cowardice.
Yeah,
We need more courage and bravery. And really, COVID taught me. I was during the initial phases of COVID, I was pacing the house,
yeah,
angry, upset. Were around me so many Mexicans were putting on the mask, either out of fear, but mostly cowardice.
oh yeah,
And I remember one meeting. I told this to someone the other day. In our gated community, like in homeowners associations, whatever, you meet with your neighbors to hash out administrative things. We do this once a year or whatever. There were during COVID, I counted. It was one evening, 2020, 2021. I remember 50 of us. All 49 of the others had face masks. I was the only one without a face mask.
yeah,
I was daring, double, triple daring in my head someone to tell me something. Nobody did. But
yeah.
this thing of cowardice really irked me during COVID, and we just need more people saying, no, being that black sheep. We've all seen that photo of the Nazi salute
Yeah.
where
Oh yeah.
one guy is not doing it. We need more of that. Hopefully, thanks to COVID, we're going to see, as you
I think
mentioned
we're gonna
earlier,
see a lot more, which is nice. So,
more people
and
like
I
that.
found
So,
I found more of them, in my local community. So it's actually quite fun. And I think like this is like one of our developers. He's from the UK right now, and he's just having so much fun. Like we're actually using AI to create propaganda posters for the government, and
like
it actually
for the government or
no,
against?
just for fun. Like
Okay, okay.
it's hilarious. Like because they're not, like doing that, but like we're creating, the Soviet type of posters, for the regime
Well,
to
I
make
mean,
fun of them.
that's
Yeah,
another, White Rose. I don't know if you're familiar with the Telegram channel that exploded during COVID, the White Rose Society, and they created these stickers in different languages, Spanish, English, and I bought one of those Thermal Brother printers, and I downloaded the schematics, and I just you print them out. I don't have them. I
yeah,
have one. I have. They're like this. This one's in Spanish. It says, um, it's getting blurry, but it says,
yeah,
imagine still believing that all of this has to do with a virus, right? Or there's other ones that say resist the Great Reset and things to
yeah.
make people think, to question whatever the official narrative
Right,
is,
right.
whether it's COVID. And I would plaster them when I go out to the shopping carts on lampposts. There were lampposts in the neighborhood where I would post them up, and when I go for a walk another day, someone took them down. And it's really strange because
Yeah.
there's no one taking care of it. So I was thinking it must have been someone who got triggered. It was a
Oh yeah.
COVID idiot that got triggered by me questioning it, and they had to rip it down. And I'd post it again and then rip it down. And so, we need to use art and propaganda, right?
Oh
To
yeah,
make
no.
make people
Yeah.
think. And they often say, humor is one of the best ways to do that. You have to make people um, laugh with the truth. If you're aggressive, if you're angry, they're going to completely reject you. So
No, exactly. Look at what stand-up comedians are trying to do now. It's kind of a resurgence now of people daring to speak more. So I think we're in for an exciting time anyways. We're living at a very exciting time on this planet and we're gonna make the best out of it, I think.
yeah, it's good. Just it's going to be fun. Look at it as a
Yeah.
game. When I was a kid, I always thought, later I studied history. I thought, what would it be like to live through the Great Depression or World War II or totalitarianism? And it's kind of like, be careful what you wish for. We're in it and
Yeah.
headed into it, and so fun times. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Robbie, where can people find more about you, everything that you do? So just tell us where everybody could find everything about you.
Yeah, website HQ is geopoliticsandempire.com. You'll find all my different links. I'm all over the place. All the video platforms active on Telegram. We got a decent sized channel there and X and Substack geopoliticsandempire.substack.com. There's a premium version where I do every week or two a group Zoom chat with members where we just for an hour or two just talk folks from around the world about what's going on. Um, and stuff like that. And I do my paid analysis every week for subscribers. So yeah, people can check that out.
Fantastic. Well, that's awesome, Robbie. Thanks for coming on the show, and I'm pretty sure we'll talk again.
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah, you have a good one. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks.